Hi again, everyone. It's great to have you aboard for another episode of the Digest, where today we welcome Dr. Helen Kara, who is an accomplished researcher, teacher, and keynote speaker on social care and health, and has been writing for more than 20 years. We are hugely fortunate to have an audience with her today, where we're going to pick her brains on behalf of all researchers who want to begin their research or improve their research methods. So, hi, Helen.
Hi.
It's great to have you aboard today, as I say. So if I can jump straight in there, your Twitter profile. Now, amongst other things, you describe yourself as having a scarecrow brain, and that's not something we'd normally associate with a professional researcher. So, so what do you mean by having a scarecrow brain?
Well, it comes from the Wizard of Oz. If you look on my bio, you'll see I also claim to have hobbit feet and an Andrisk heart. And the Hobbit, of course, is from Tolkien, and the Andrisk is from Becky Chambers' wonderful novels about going into space, being in space. But the Scarecrow in the Wizard of Oz sang a little song about how he thought he didn't have a brain, and he was going to Oz to get a brain. He really wanted a brain, and he talked about all the things he could, sang a little song about all the things he could do if he only had a brain. So I just thought it would be quite an amusing thing to put down when actually I earn my living with my brain. So presumably there is one in there somewhere.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's a really good song. That I like it. Conversing with the flowers and the rain stuff. Yeah, it's good. Now, your main area of expertise is in health and social care. How did you develop an interest in that?
Well, I was a social worker. I studied psychology for my first degree, and then did 5 years of social work with children and young people in London who were in residential care with the local authority. And that was very interesting. That was an eye-opener. And I got to a point with that career where I had to either get a qualification in it and do it for the rest of my life, or change direction, and I decided to change direction. So social care and health is really my background, but my specialism now is more research methods and research ethics. I still do commissioned work in social care and health, but I also do a lot now with universities around the world and with other organizations who want my expertise that I've built up over 20 years that I've been doing independent research work, and through the studying and the writing that I've done as well.
No, I want to sort of focus a little bit deeper on independent research in a little while, but I think one of the most difficult steps that in researching or in the researching process is trying to convince people to either become subjects or getting them to fill out that all-important survey. So how do you, what kind of thing what methods do you use to get people to do that for you?
It varies a lot. Some of the research I do is with professionals in professional contexts. That's much easier because generally there's an expectation that they will be involved in research that perhaps their employers or their funders are conducting. But generally, I think one really good idea is to try and make the process kind of fun, because why should research not be fun? Why should participants and indeed researchers not get something out of it in the moment, that day, having a good time? Why can't we have a good time doing research? I think that's entirely possible. But different people have different ideas of what is fun. So it's not just simple. Because say you want to use a creative method for gathering data and say to people, well, come and do some modeling and talk to me about it. Some people will love that idea. Some people will hate it and cringe and want to run away. So it's often a good idea to have more than one method on offer. Even just recently, I've been doing some research with professionals, and because of the pandemic, of course, I'm interviewing people remotely, and I've been saying to them, would you prefer to do this by phone or on Zoom? And just giving that amount of choice is really helpful, because some people have quite a strong preference for one or the other for their own reasons. So it gives them a bit more agency in the process. So make it fun, but give people a choice, and remember that everyone has a right to say no. This is perhaps the most important point. We can encourage people to take part. We can try to make the process attractive, but we can't make people join in with our research, and we should never try. It's interesting that some governments do coerce people into doing research. For example, in Australia, it's compulsory to take part in the census. So coercion is clearly a research method. It's not one I would advocate. It's not one you'll find in the textbooks, but it's one that does get used in the world. But I would never want to associate myself or my own research with any kind of method along those lines. For me, it has to be entirely voluntary. And more than that, people must be able to withdraw from the process if they become uncomfortable or just stop enjoying themselves or just decide they want to do something else. And they should be able to withdraw their data at that point or afterwards then as well. So try and make it fun, offer choice, but bear in mind that people can and will say no, and you just have to say, that's fine, and move on. Even if you're really fed up about it, you just go, yep, that's fine. Thanks for your time. Bye. And move on.
Yeah, you mentioned so a forced coercion there. I mean, that's obviously dodgy ground, because if someone doesn't want to do something, they're gonna give you the answers perhaps that you're not looking for. They're not going to be honest, and they're just going to sort of tick box A in every question. It's a seriously flawed way of doing things.
I would agree. There's always scope for participants to subvert the research process. And we do have to be aware that people tell us the story they're willing to tell us. It may not be the whole story, it may not be a true story, or it may not be entirely true, for all sorts of reasons. Now, this is not to say that I think all participants are complete liars. I'm not saying that at all. But we all sort of censor ourselves, depending what researchers are asking about. What seems quite a trivial question for one person might feel quite intimate for another person and quite sensitive, and something they perhaps don't want to go into for reasons of their own experience in their life. We can't tell as researchers what's going to touch a nerve in our participants. We can't entirely tell. So safeguards against that are around saying to people, I'd like to ask you some questions, but if there's any that you don't want to answer, that's fine, just say so and we can skip them. You'll see that people who design surveys these days now quite often put in a question saying, if you're paying attention, please click option C for this question, and then move on to actually ask some more stuff about what they want to ask. And they do that to weed out the people who are just clicking A for every single answer because they can't really be bothered. So, researchers are trying to work with this in different ways. And I agree with you about coercion being very dodgy ground, like seriously badly dodgy. But there are also grayer areas around persuasion. Some people very much want to please others, or may very much want to please you for particular reasons, and therefore may be more inclined to say yes than if it's just a complete stranger. As researchers, we have to think all of these things through quite carefully and make sure we're doing all that we can to not put pressure on potential participants, to make sure that people who do join in with our research are doing it fully from their own free will and on an informed choice basis.
Yeah, it's a very good point now, because for my TESOL masters, I needed to do some research into, my research was teacher motivation and job satisfaction in a Saudi context. And one of the teachers I worked with on a regular basis moaned completely about how he disliked his job, and I thought, you'd be a great subject. And when I interviewed him, it was like it was the best job in the world, and so it's just totally unreliable. And so, yeah, strangers are probably a good bet as well. Yeah. Now, say for example, I mentioned earlier I wanted to do some research into contract cheating in a UAE context. If I'm not associated with the university, how would I, as an independent researcher, go about getting ethical approval for my study?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and it's not easy. There are various ad hoc committees in different countries that are set up. I work on one here in the UK that's associated with the Social Research Association here. And we sometimes just do there are several experts in a panel, and some of us will just do a review for some money on a fairly ad hoc basis now and again. There is the New Zealand Ethics Committee, which is, I think, accessible for people all around the world. That was set up independently of universities and health authorities, which is the other institutions that sometimes have ethics committees. The New Zealand Ethics Committee was set up independently for community-based researchers to have access to full ethical approval. And also some other organisations now are setting up ethics committees. So I've been working with a big third sector organisation in Scotland. It's national across the whole of Scotland, and they've set up their own ethics committee because they're a health charity, and they get researchers from universities wanting to work with their service users as research participants, and they very much got fed up with all of this happening, and researchers just coming in and extracting data and going away again, and the organisation never benefiting. And they asked me to work with them to set up their own ethics committee. They decided that even if people had ethical approval from universities, they would have to go through this organisation's ethical approval process as well. And other communities in the world have been doing that. Some indigenous communities, like the San people of Southern Africa, who live in the country we call South Africa and Botswana, they have set up their own ethics committee. So people who want to do research with them as indigenous people have to go through their own ethics process, as well as any others they may have had to go through. So it's a really interesting landscape at the moment. So there's not an easy, I don't have an easy answer for you about what to do in the UAE. I'm not clear what the landscape is there. I have visited the UAE, but a few years ago, and as a traveller rather than as an academic or a professional. So I don't really know what the options are for you there, but there are some options around the world, and this is something that's growing, and I think it's interesting to witness. I also think that independent ethics committees may be a whole lot more ethical than university research ethics committees, which I actually think should be renamed and called institutional protection committees, because really that's what they are. They're not actually helping that much with the ethicalness or not of the applications that come before them. They're really making sure nobody's going to sue them. So all they're really bothered about is participant welfare and data storage. They rarely ask about anything else, like the ethics of analysis, which is where a lot of the malpractice in research can happen. If you look at Retraction Watch in the US, that logs the retractions of academic journal articles, many of the problems that cause errors, that cause falsification, fabrication, it's not always on purpose, but sometimes it is. Many of those errors happen at the analytics stage. We know that now. So why are research ethics committees not asking about researchers' ethical approaches to analysis? Because they're not bothered, because nobody's going to sue them for that. Worst that can happen, a paper gets retracted, they don't really care. So I think some of these independent ethics committees may be, in fact, I'm sure they are, a whole lot more ethical than the university ones. I could go on about this for quite a long time, but I figure I probably should stop there.
All right. And another question here about, I guess it's similar, but again, as an independent, how would you go about getting funded for research?
Oh, that's just a nightmare. I mean, most of the research I do is professional commissioned research. I do a lot of evaluation research, which is under contract to organizations. It's applied research. It's not all evaluation. Some of it's knowledge gathering research, but it's generally under contract. And it's not academic knowledge gathering type research that we might think of in this context. Getting funding for that as an independent in the UK is really difficult. It does vary by country. I understand there are more opportunities in America. I've no idea what the picture is in the UAE or many other parts of the world. In the UK, there are a few very small funds. Like there's one where you can get a maximum of £10,000 over 2 years, which really doesn't buy an awful lot of expert research time. And it makes me sad, because I have lobbied both individually and through the Social Research Association, a lot of independent researchers in that organisation are very interested in this. We've lobbied the UK Research Councils, which is now under one big umbrella, and we've lobbied that big umbrella body too, saying independent researchers can do a lot for very little. When I see university funding bids, sometimes I get put in as a team member on a university funding bid, which is great. When that happens, that's really nice. It's always interesting stuff. I can work with nice people. It's good. But I see the draft bids, and I see that the university is probably taking a third of the money for overheads. Now, clearly, universities are expensive to run, so, understood. But it's a hell of a rake-off. And I think if I was you know, if a funder would give me 25 grand or, you know, maybe even 50,000, I could do so much with that because I'm fleet, you know, I'm flexible, I don't have big overheads, I just need some expenses. Anyway, another soapbox. You're getting me on all my soapboxes today. But it is really difficult. And essentially, I use my commissioned research to fund my writing because I earn enough to take a day a week to basically not get paid and do the writing that I love to do. I love doing writing more than I love doing research. If I loved research more, then I might do research on that day a week where I don't get paid, but I still can earn enough to live on in the rest of the time. That just makes me very fortunate. Not everybody is that lucky. So
yeah, universities are they're pushing their teachers into research, and I know on the sort of teacher side there's something of a sort of backlash there. They don't really want to do that. I can kind of understand the merits of teachers also being researchers, but for me, I think they're better off in the classroom if that's what they want to do. What are your views on, for example, over here we've got a rating system, and I'm sure everywhere else have got a rating system as well. And the more research that's done from the university, the higher your rating. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get better teachers. So what are your views on that?
there are two things about that, really. There's a wider issue for me around practitioner research, which applies to teachers, but also to nurses and social workers and other practitioners. I think for some people, doing research alongside practice and doing practice-based research is really valuable and makes a valuable contribution to the research literature and so on. But for teachers specifically in universities, I know from my networks that a number of universities, as you say, are pushing teachers to do more research. But what the universities tend to forget is that research takes time and energy. And in many cases, they're encouraging teachers to do research when teachers already have a more than full-time job, and they're not offering to take any of that caseload away from them to give them the time, headspace, energy, etc., to do their research. So I think if universities want teachers to do research, they need to square that circle and find a way to make sure that the teachers who they want to do research actually have less teaching, less admin, fewer meetings, ring-fenced time, half a day a week, 2 days a month, whatever, to do research in. Then I think it can happen. Without that, I think it's a hiding to nothing. And I think academic teachers have got enough on their plates. You know as well as I do that many academic teachers work way beyond their hours, you know, all the time, and will go so far to support students because they love students and they care about students and they want students to succeed. So they'll make themselves available out of hours and they'll do all sorts of things to, you know, to help and support those students. And then trying to get people to do research on top of that, it's just cruel if you're not going to give people the time. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, totally agree there. What are moving on to people getting into research, or who are researching? What are the most common problems that that stop people from completing their research, do you think?
I think there are several things there. Sometimes it's about not really realizing what they're taking on, because research is a big, complicated business. And there's a sort of inverted U-curve with any research project where you start off all excited. Oh, I've got a new project. Oh, goody, goody. And then you get into it and then it's like, oh, no, I've got so much to do. And then you get into the analysis and it's like, none of this is ever going to make sense. And then you claw your way up the other side and you eventually get to the end and then it's all nice again. I've finished my research. I've finished my project. So I think people who don't understand this sort of inverted curve pattern of research get to the horrible bit at the bottom and just think, I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm going to stop. I'm failing. I can't do it. And if they don't have enough support at that point and enough understanding of this as a shape that is always there. I mean, I've been doing research for over 20 years and it still happens to me. You know, I still get to an analytic point where I think, I know all the other projects got finished and made sense, but this one really isn't going to, you know, and then I just have to eat a lot of chocolate and maybe cry for a bit. And then, you know, you find a way through, find a way out. But people who don't have a sense of that, who don't understand that, and who don't have the support to get through it, that's hard. And some people found it on the writing. Writing is difficult. Writing is hard work. Reading is pretty easy for those of us who can read. And that makes people think writing should be easy. And people think writing is somehow a mirror of reading, that you start with chapter 1 and then you write all of the words till you get to the end, you write the end and you're done. But that is so not how writing works. And it's so hard. And so that's another area where people sometimes flounder and founder and stop and just think, oh, no, I'm not doing this. I enjoyed gathering the data. I enjoyed analysing. The analysing was fine. Writing, forget it. I'm not going to finish this project.
Right. So kind of on the same thing, same theme here. What's the most common mistake that researchers make that's the easiest eradicated?
Novice researchers think more data is better than less. You know, the more data you collect, the better. That's really easily eradicated. It's much better to collect less and do more with it. Part of the problem is it's very hard to figure out what's enough data. Different methodologies, different schools of thought have different answers to this question. None of them particularly satisfactory, or few of them anyway. And so novice researchers tend to think, well, if I've got lots, then that'll work. So they'll collect like 400 documents and 300 photographs and 45 interview transcripts, and then they think, oh, now what do I do? And that sets up a real headache at the analytics stage. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is planning the project, because if you plan the project, take that into it. You know, part of it is planning the whole project, not just planning the next bit and then doing it, and then planning the bit after that and then doing that, but actually planning the whole project before you get going, with an awareness that your plans may need to change as your knowledge develops, as circumstances change, etc. But having a bit of a roadmap and thinking through all the different aspects, like thinking through the implications for your analysis of the type and amount of data you collect, is really helpful. And thinking about how you're going to analyze your data, because analysis is so badly taught and so poorly understood and so minimally written about. And some of that's to do with word counts in journal articles, where you can't explain your whole analytic process because you've only got 50 words. So all you can do is say you used some software and you did a thematic analysis, and you can't say anything else. But that means that people don't understand analysis, and and analyzing data is really hard as well. So a good plan and collect less, analyze more would be my real top tips for novice researchers.
Okay, all right, thanks. Okay, imagine I've got my my work together. It's all finished. It's all completed. I've gone through the inverted bell curve, and I've planned and would you recommend deadlining that plan?
Yes, I think deadlines are helpful for. I mean, they talk about smart targets, don't they? And the T in that is timed. And I do think deadlines are helpful. At the same time, I mean, you may have external deadlines imposed. You know, if I do research for a client, they want it done by a certain date, and I need to do that. It's my job. If you're doing research for your own purposes, then setting your own deadlines, you can be a bit more flexible if you need to. But be aware that you know, if you want to do this research project, just get it done. One of the things I talk about in one of my books, excuse me if I just flash this up the screen, has a chapter on managing the research process, which is something that isn't written about very much. How you do find the time, how you do, you know, make that work in it, because research is often written about as if it exists in some kind of bubble separate from the rest of the world, but it doesn't. Okay. It exists in the same part of the world as your family and your social life and your health and your ironing and all of those other things that have to get done. So you have to slot it in alongside of those things in different ways and different time. Find those little holes and corners of time, like the queue you're standing in when you can think about a problem with your research because all you're doing is waiting in line. Like when you're in the shower in the morning, or when you're traveling to work or to somewhere else. Those times that you can use for different little tasks to move your research forward incrementally. And it's those little incremental movements forward that get the whole job done. So people think there's no point just doing 10 minutes work, but there is, because all of those, if you do 10 minutes and then another time you do another 10 minutes, it stacks up. It's really worthwhile.
Yeah. Okay. Getting back to my original question, I've got my paper done. I'm very happy with it. How do I get it published? What are the best tips for getting it published?
Well, if you're talking about journal articles, one best tip is don't write it first. Research the journals first and figure out which journal you're going to write for, because different journals have different requirements around things like word count. And you'll write very differently if you're writing for a journal that has a 4,000 word limit than if it has an 8,000 word limit. So you need to know. And you also need to cite a couple of articles from that journal if you think you want to get published in it. It's a game, but it's a game we have to play. And study the articles to see if they all have, for example, if they all have a page and a half of introduction, or if they all have an 8-word title, or any pattern that you can discern, then follow that pattern in your article, because that will make it look already more like an article that fits that journal, and people reviewing it and editors will look at it more favorably. Doesn't guarantee publication, but it helps. So research the journals first, write to the pattern and write to all of their guidelines for authors. They usually have them on the website. Make sure it's a reputable journal, not a predatory journal, because you don't want to be writing for one of those. And then write clearly, write in plain English. There used to be a theory that the cleverer you were, the longer the words you would use and the longer the sentences you would write them in, and that long words in long sentences denoted cleverness. We're now beginning to realize that expressing complex concepts simply is a lot more clever than using a load of unintelligible gobbledygook jargon words that nobody can understand. Of course, you may have to use a technical term here and there. If so, that's fine. Just define it at the first point of use so that everybody knows what you're talking about. But write clearly, write short sentences, use plain English, and read your work out loud to yourself before you submit it to anyone else. Literally sit there. I do that with all of my work. Whole books. When I get to draft stage, I sit down and I literally read it all out. And you pick up such a lot of clunky sentences. They look fine when you just read them with your eyes, because you know what it's supposed to say or how it's supposed to come across. But when you make yourself read it out loud, and some people use other tricks like putting it in a different font, or if you write on screen, printing out and reading from the paper, all of these different tricks that you can use to help yourself see it afresh, as if with someone else's eyes, and pick up the little bits that don't quite make sense, or the repetitions you didn't mean to make, where you've used the same sentence twice in the same page because you've copied and pasted instead of cutting and pasting. You know, these things are so easy to do. So that will all help.
Yeah, I advocate all of that myself. Actually, so yeah, it's nice to have some reassurance that I'm on the right track as well. Now, you mentioned your latest book. You've written, what is it, 16 so far?
I've kind of slightly lost count. That wasn't the latest one. That was actually my first book, but it's the second edition. Came out in 2017. Yeah. When I realized in the last year of my doctoral study, I realized I wanted to write a book on research methods. It took me 5 years to get around to it. To figure out, well, I was busy, and then there was a recession, so I wasn't busy, so I had time to write. And it took me a while to figure out, because there's loads of books on methods. It took me a while to figure out that what I needed to do was write one for practice-based researchers, for practitioners doing research, for people doing their masters alongside their day job and trying to figure out how to fit that in, for people who've been given the responsibility of doing evaluation as an insider on top of their day job and trying to figure out how to fit that in, all of this kind of stuff. So I wrote it. It got published. It got nice reviews. I thought, that's ticked off the bucket list. I don't have to do that again. Then guess what? then the next one was one I went looking for because I wanted to read it. I've always used creative methods, and I had a difficult project for a client, and I thought I could do with more methods than I've got at my fingertips. Let me go and find the book on creative methods. There must be one out there. I can read it. I can learn some new stuff to use. And I went looking. And I looked and looked and looked with a sinking heart and thought, I'm going to have to write this before I can read it. So I did. And then I just carried on after that.
Yeah, it seems like it's been non-stop. 16, I counted 16 in 20 years. It's pretty good going. So it's a lot of
Well,
work.
actually, you know what? I didn't start writing until 2010. So it's actually in 10 years.
That is incredible. Yeah,
Some
it's
of them are
amazing.
very short, like my Little Sage books are short. They didn't take so long to write. And some of them I've edited rather than written, and that is a job of work, but it's not as big a job of work as writing a whole book. So, and some of them I've co-written, and again, that's not as big a job. I'm just reading the proofs now of a book called Creative Research Methods in Education that I've written with 3 colleagues. So I only had to write 3 chapters of that one. So, you know, and it still worked because we had to collaborate and we had to read each other's and feedback on each other's and all of that, but it's still less work than writing a whole book on my own, which I'm doing that again now, doing a new one now for Sage. So, yeah.
Right. Okay. Final question. Which is your favorite book of yours?
I think the one of mine that I'm probably most proud of is my ethics book, actually. Research Ethics in the Real World. This came out in 2018, and it is the hardest book I've ever written. And that's, I think, why I'm most proud of it. It was really, really hard to write the book I wanted to write. If I'd known how hard it was going to be, I don't think I would have started. I don't think I would have done it. But by the time I realized how difficult it was, I was too deep in to stop. And I think,
about it?
Well, there were and are some other books on research ethics which are good books, useful, and they're fine. But again, they treat ethics as though it exists in a bubble, separate from the rest of research, separate from the rest of the world. And I felt very strongly that research ethics are connected with our own personal ethics, with social ethics, with institutional ethics, with political ethics, and that none of the literature that existed up to then really made that clear in any way. And then I'd had a proposal reviewed and I'd revised it, it had been accepted by Policy Press, I was underway with writing. And then I went to a seminar at a conference which was given by 3 Indigenous researchers, and it absolutely blew my mind. And I thought, I need to learn more about this. And then I realized I needed to incorporate the Indigenous research and ethics literature into the book and put it side by side with the Euro-Western research and ethics literature. And I went back to my publisher, who said, yep, can totally see the point, but we're going to need to go through another proposal review because this is such a fundamental change. And I said, fine. So we did that. And then I wrote the book. And then it also had to go through 2 sets of manuscript review with revisions in between, because we did one set. And I thought at the time this needs to be reviewed by Indigenous researchers. And then it was difficult to find Indigenous researchers who were willing to review, because understandably they've got much more important things to do than help some white woman in England with her book. And it wasn't just the process, the actual writing of it was really hard. Chapters came out, chapters went back in. My publishers, the editors were great. My commissioning editors, I had 2 in the course of the book. They changed in the middle, which was hard, but actually they were both excellent, and they helped me a whole lot, because it was just really difficult to figure out what to say, how to say it, what was important. But I think I got there, and I feel really proud of that, because it took 3.5 years. It was really tough, and I'm pleased with the result, and I've had good feedback on it.
Helen, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and learning from you as well. So many, many thanks for that.
Well, thank you for the opportunity and for validating some of I love it when you say, oh yes, I do, I think that too, and I do that. Oh, great. Oh, fantastic. It's not just me, because one of the things about independent research is those are conversations I rarely get to have. So that's been really nice for me. Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity.
It's a pleasure. It's really, speaking to people like yourself as well, I mean, as well as helping me, I think it's so beneficial. I really do. And we've had a huge amount of viewing minutes, and yeah, it's really taken off, you know. And the standard of people who speak to us, the amount of learning we can do it's incredible. So thank you so much for that. All right, cheers again, Helen. Take care of yourself.
Pleasure. You too. Say hi to Pfizer for me.
I will do. Yeah, I'll pass on your regards, and back to you, of course, as well.
All right. Take care. Bye. Bye.